Erev Shabbat Shalom. This week, as opposed to the last couple, the Parsha is so full of ideas that it's hard to know what to choose. And I'm going to pick one specifically for reasons which I hope will become immediately apparent. Parshat Behhalotcha, on a personal note, has special resonance for me personally. First of all, the Haftarah, Rani V'Simchi, is the same Haftarah as Shabbat Chanukah, which was my bar mitzvah Parsha. And 24 years ago, my son, Ariel, had his bar mitzvah with the same Haftarah. So it's very moving. Something about this Parsha and its Haftarah that speak to me. Behhalotcha also provided the occasion for Mori Rabbi Rav Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, to deliver, I think, one of his most famous analyses, which led to the development of an entire theory of leadership. And since leadership is something that we discuss a lot, and the lack of which we feel intensely, I don't think it's unique to Israel, although here it's felt especially intensely, maybe in light of the electoral logjam that we're in the middle of, or maybe it's something more existential, something deeper. But in the United States, I feel from people who've told me that the need for real leadership, for people of integrity, is felt very, very acutely. In any case, Rav Soloveitchik gave a long analysis on leadership. It's easily available at the YU Torah site under Behhalotcha, or, if I remember correctly, it's also available on the Bergen County Beit Midrash, bcbm.org. And I really urge you to have a listen. It's long, as with Rav Soloveitchik's practice. It's long. It's about 2 hours. It's certainly worth the time, and it doesn't have to be listened to all Erev Shabbat. You can do it during the week or whatever. With his remarks in mind, although I'm not going to plagiarize him certainly, and I'm not going to repeat them. He can, since the drasha is recorded, you can listen to yourself. You don't need that. I don't need to do that. It occurred to me that the next three parshiot are really all about leadership. They're all about Moses. That's true, but they're more than about Moses. They're about the place. They're about democracy. They're about the place for everyone in the covenantal community, in the Jewish community. They're about the uniqueness of every individual. They're about people knowing who they are and who they're not. Each one in its own way. In this parsha, we have a story of a couple of rebellions and Moshe Rabbeinu reaching out for help. And at the end of the parsha, we have the story of Aaron and Miriam complaining about their brother, complaining to their brother about the fact that they felt that their sister-in-law was being treated unfairly by Moses. In the next parsha, in Shlach, we have a confrontation, but within the leadership, not so much within Moses, but within the leadership of the tribes, where 10 tribes, 10 of the spies who were representative of each tribe, basically lost their will, they lost their mojo, they lost their backbone, and they were stood up to by Yehoshua and Kalev, and they paid the price, and the entire Jewish people, all the children of Israel paid the price for their lack of nerve. And finally, the week after that, we have Parshat Korach, which is a straight-on rebellion against Moses' authority in the most populist, demagogic fashion. And how Moses responds to it, and how the people respond to it, and how God responds to it. All of that is about what, among other things, is about leadership. But I would like to focus in on one particular point and one particular episode. The Parsha tells us, the Torah tells us, that Moshe finally, after a series of setbacks, decides he just can't do it anymore. He can't, it's too much for one person. And that's a sign of a leader. They're saying, I can't do it all. There's nothing worse for any entity, a company, a family, anybody, than micromanagers. No one person can do everything. And already, Yitro, his father-in-law, came and took a look when he came from Midian. He says, Moshe, you can't do it. Navol tibol. It's going to kill you. It's going to weigh you down. You can't do everything. You can't judge every case. And by implication, no one is totally indispensable. at least not on that level, on the pragmatic level. There was no doubt that Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership, Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy was unique. Moshe Rabbeinu was the only prophet who can give laws, the only one who can be legislative. That's true. But in terms of practice, no one is indispensable. Or as my father, Meir Ostrovitz, used to say, the cemeteries are full of people who were indispensable. So Moshe Rabbeinu realized that finally, and he says, you know what, I need an heir. I need somebody who is going to be able to study with me and inherit my place. And that is, again, another one of the great sins of contemporary leaders, is that they think they're indispensable, and therefore nobody can take their place. Well, I have news for them. No one lives forever. And therefore, if you don't cultivate younger leaders, and you don't cultivate younger teachers, and you don't pass on what you have, then you've basically betrayed your leadership and you've betrayed your charge. In Talmud Torah, it certainly is true. If you've been given a tradition from your teachers, teacher or teachers, and you don't pass it on to your children and to your students, and students in the broad sense of the term, then of course you've betrayed them, because that means that this is called tradition. Traditio means to say over, to pass over. If you don't do that, if you don't have a masora, then you've basically betrayed yourself, your teachers, and you've betrayed those who would have learned from you. I could really go on in this vein, but that's not what I wanted to talk about right this minute. Okay, so he finally says, you need somebody to pass on to, and he says, I need help. And he asks God to help him appoint 70 elders, and God says, okay, fine, here are the 70 people, and God's and his spirit was extended to them. Let me read the pasuk. The pasuk said, He collected the 70 people and caused them to stand around the tent of meeting. Vayered Hashem ba'anan. God came down in a cloud. Vayedaber elav, and he spoke to Moshe. Vayotzel min haruach asher alav v'yiten al 70 ish zkenim. Vayehi kenoach aleihem haruach vayitnabu v'lo yasafu. That God came and he spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu, and then the spirit of Moses was extended to the 70 people, meaning that when you have a teacher, your standing is derivative. No one starts, except for Adam, maybe. No one starts from zero. And that means that you have an obligation to those who came before. You have an obligation to pass on to the next generation and to function as a leader. You also have a generation to tradition. Tradition obligates. This is something in which Judaism is very different than other religions, and certainly than contemporary society. Tradition obligates. If there is a consensus halachic position, and you are not on a position of the level of scholarship to be able to totally undermine or overthrow or dispute that position, tradition obligates. That's why the Shulchan Aruch is obligatory. Now, it doesn't mean that everything freezes. It's another conversation. But tradition obligates. The teacher obligates, and all of these 70 people, were inspired, but they depended upon Moshe Rabbeinu, and by extension upon God, for their authority and for their religious inspiration. Then what happens is very interesting. Vayitnabu v'lo yasafu. All of them prophesied, v'lo yasafu. Now here, there's a machloket as to what v'lo yasafu means. Yasaf, the verb, can mean not to stop, and it can also mean not to continue. Is it lo hosifu? In other words, they didn't keep going, they didn't keep prophesying. This was a one-shot deal. This is what Rashi says in his first explanation. Or no, v'lo yasafu, they didn't stop. They didn't pull themselves back. They kept going in that regard. And that's the interpretation which Rashi cites in the name of Onkelos, the name of the Aramaic translation of the Torah. Now, those both angles are very, very, very interesting, because both interpretations reflect the way that a person could react, or maybe should react. I'm not making decisions here. Should react or could react to the very experience of being in authority or being a teacher. A person shelo yasaf, who didn't continue, shelo hosif, sorry, who just prayed, prophesied on a one-time deal and didn't continue. Such a person could have said, "Oh, I'm not Moses. I'm not Moses. So I don't have a right, even by extension, even by, as a derivative of Moses, I don't have a right to even participate in that kind of activity. I can't pretend to represent Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is a whole nother level, and therefore they stopped. They had the experience of prophecy. It established the connection between Moshe Rabbeinu and them, but after that they were on their own, and they didn't pretend to be who they're not. That's a sign of humility, knowing who you are and who you're not. A person who pretends who they're not to be who they're not is just arrogant. A person who pretends not to be who they are and not to use the tools that they are given on their own and their own responsibility is a liar. He's a liar and an ingrate. He's a liar to himself, he's a liar to everybody else, and he's an ingrate to God who gave him those talents. The other interpretation, that they prophesied and they didn't stop. Now, that's a little strange because of the continuation of the story. The story continues. Vayisharu shnei anashim b'machaneh. There were two people who were left in the camp. Eldad, Shem ha'echad Eldad. One's name was Eldad. V'shem hasheni Medad, and the other one's name was Medad. V'tanach alei maruach, and the spirit came upon them. V'hema baktuvim lo yatzu ahola. They didn't go outside, so therefore they didn't encounter the outside world. V'yitnabu b'machaneh, and they continued prophesying. Vayaratz hana'ar vayaged laMoshe vayomar, and the boy, Rashi says it's Yoshua, comes and tells Moshe, Eldad u'Meidad mitnabim b'machaneh. Eldad u'Meidad haven't stopped prophesying. Vayan Yoshua bin Nun misharet Moshe mibchor. I'm sorry, it wasn't Yoshua who was the nar. Gershon ben Moshe. Okay, Rashi says it was Moshe Rabbeinu's son. Vayan Yoshua bin Nun misharet Moshe, and Yoshua's Moshe Rabbeinu's assistant, Mibchurav, who had been close to Moses from his youth, said, Adoni Moshe Klaim, put him in jail. They're violating your prerogatives. Vayomer lo Moshe, Hamekaneh atali. You're so jealous for my honor. You're looking out for me. Why are you looking out for me? Umi ten kol am Hashem neviim, ki eten Hashem et rucho alehem. And if only all of God's people were also prophets. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu is willing to be so large in spirit fits actually the story at the end of the Parsha, which Aaron and Miriam both complain about Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Torah says, "Vayish Moshe anav me'od." That Moshe Rabbeinu was very, very humble. And here he's willing. He says, "I don't have to have a monopoly on everything. I'm not the be all and end all. I wish everybody were a prophet." The problem with this is that Moshe Rabbeinu was very well aware of the fact that he was different, that he was of a different order, that he had a relationship with God, which probably no one ever had before, no one will have one afterwards. So what kind of humility when they complained about him? And what was the humility that allowed him to be so easygoing about Eldad and Medad? I'd like to suggest that, number one, that Eldad and Medad were able to continue prophesying because they realized who they were and who they weren't. It was alavai that every single Jew, every single leader, should push themselves to the farthest capacity that they're able, or realizing what they can achieve and realize what they can't achieve. But everyone has the right, every Jew has the right to be part not only of the covenantal community, but of the Torah. Everybody has a part of the covenant, everybody has the part of the Torah, whether it's a large part or a small part. Every single person has not only the right, but the obligation to fulfill their part within the Torah dialogue. Now, there's a hierarchy sometimes. Some people are smarter than others, some people are more sensitive than others. Very nice. But that doesn't mean that you can't be you. You're ot in the Sefer Torah. Used to say that every single that there are every single person has a letter in the Sefer Torah, and if one letter is missing from the Sefer Torah is possible. The Sefer Torah is invalid. Why? Because every single person has to put their part in. And that means knowing, and just like every single letter is circumscribed, has to be what's called a mukaf kavil, it has to be surrounded by parchment. So similarly, every single Jew has to know what their letter is, and to know they can't go outside they can't go outside the frame of the letter or the shape of the letter, because then the letter would be no good. That's the challenge of leadership. To fill up the form of the letter and not go beyond the bounds, because at that point you violate yourself and you violate your mission, and you actually impinge on somebody else's territory. If two letters touch themselves in the Sefer Torah is also no good. And I think that's why Eldad and Medad were allowed. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, I wish they would all do that. Everybody should let him be Eldad and let him be Medad, and they'll all be prophets, and everybody will feel that they're part of things and not feel alienated. It's interesting. I just heard a podcast, which, among other things, discussed the question of women's learning Torah and the advancement of women's learning Torah and the development of frameworks within which they can share their Torah, which the entire Jewish community enrich the world as a result. One of the objections that's raised to women learning Torah Shemal Peh is the fact that they're formally there are one objection. One of they are formally exempted from the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. That's true. That's true. However, and this Rav Soloveitchik said on many occasions, they may be technically women may be technically exempted from the mitzvah of learning Torah, and certain technical parameters might not apply to them. But there's another connection in which the mitzvah Talmud Torah, in which learning Torah is an integral part of everybody's life, and that is the fact that the mitzvah of worshiping God and communing with God, the mitzvah of Avodat Hashem, of worship, is not confined to prayer or meditation or psalms or singing. If you look in Maimonides, my Rambam in the book of Mitzvot, the Sefer Mitzvot, number 5, explicitly quotes the Sifrei, it quotes the Midrash Halacha, which says, on no uncertain terms, that avoda is established through, you worship God through prayer and study. So women may be technically exempt from the mitzvah Talmud Torah narrowly conceived, but they are absolutely obligated in worship of God, and therefore Talmud Torah is part of their integral life. It's one of the reasons Rav Chaim Brisker used to say that women should. That's why women say Birkas HaTorah, because the Torah should be no less. They should be no less intimately involved in the study of Torah than men. So the same thing is over here. Eldad and Medad, I don't think Eldad and Medad were intending to equate themselves with Moshe Rabbeinu. I think what they were doing is saying, I'm going to be Eldad and Medad. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, that'd be great. Let me have an entire nation of prophets, which each one with their own message, on their own terms. And as long as they stay within the derivative nature of the covenant, of the Torah that was given by Moshe Rabbeinu, because don't forget, all of this nevuah, all of this prophecy, all of this inspiration was derivative, more the merrier. More the merrier. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu was Haisha Moshe Anav Ma'od Al Pnei Kol Ha'adama. Kol Ha'adam Shal Pnei Ha'adama. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu was the most modest people of all. He didn't walk around saying, I'm nobody. He knew who he was. But when you know who you are, then you're not insecure. If you know who you are, you're confident. If you know who you are, you'll be smart enough and wise enough to reach out for help. If you're a leader, you'll know to look to people who can help you and can supplement you, and where you can actually defer to them because you know who you're not. And if you're really humble and you know who you are, then you also know you're mortal, and you have moral and, in our case, religious obligation to cultivate students, to pass on what you have, and to know that the next generation of leaders is in your responsibility and in your purview. So I think that's briefly one lesson that I would like to share for Parshat Behhalotcha. As I said, I recommend you go to the Rav as well, You'll see some things are based on him, some things I differ, some things I've taken different directions. But it's material to think about for Shabbat Parshat, for a long Shabbat. Parshat Behhalotcha. Shabbat Shalom U'Barach.